Hey everyone. I haven't made a video in over 8 months. The reason is simple. Anyone can get online and make a video commentary criticizing anyone and anything, and often they do. In fact, many content creators use their criticisms as a form of drama marketing to grow their audiences. Again, this is nothing new. Even when these content creators have no valid criticisms, they resort to appeals to emotion and character attacks, employing either half truths taken out of context or outright lies. In other words, logical fallacies and dishonesty. Well, I decided to take a different approach. As anyone who's spent any time watching my content or reading my book, The Feminist Lie, should know, I have a legal background. While I've collaborated with attorneys and made videos with them in the past, I realized that that wasn't enough. And at the end of the day, talk by itself, even if it's in the form of a well-produced and highly engaging video, is just that. It's talk. With this in mind, I decided I wouldn't talk for a while, and I would let my actions speak for me. I'm working with multiple law firms now in order to help men and fathers directly. These attorneys are licensed in New York, California, Colorado, Alabama, and Florida. I'm actively participating in lawsuits with national attention in both federal and state court. I've written briefs considered by at least one state Supreme Court, and went after a DV Queen child abuser so prominent that she's an institution in the jurisdiction where the case is currently pending. While I can't discuss the specifics in any more detail because this is active litigation, I can say that my involvement has had clear positive impacts on the lives of the men that I'm helping. This is important because, again, at the end of the day, like I've said many times before, talk by itself is cheap, and what we do is what matters. Our actions should match our words. While I've helped people online and during live streams in the past with their court cases, and I've even had some of them come back and thank me, I felt like I had to take a more active role in helping fathers and men. However, while I've not made any videos, I've been extremely active on Minds, Gab, and Twitter, even though Twitter shadow bans many of my posts. I've returned to live streams on the Redman Group and 21 Studios, and as of today, I'm making videos again. But I won't likely be publishing any videos more than once a week. So with that out of the way, it's time to dive into the subject of this video. While everyone on the left and the right is focusing their reporting on individual aspects of what the legacy media refers to as protests, I perceive them very differently. I believe, and have said this publicly many times, that the United States is currently undergoing a color revolution. While some people are starting to realize this, I've been sounding the alarm for nearly 2 years. In August 2018, I talked about how I believe that communists within the United States have started an insurrection. Then, later in 2018, I published the video entitled Overthrowing Democracy by Any Means Necessary, where I focused on Antifa and how I perceive them preparing for a communist revolution within the United States. Shortly thereafter, I published a video describing in detail how the Southern Poverty Law Center and major charitable foundations, including the Ford Foundation and the Kellogg Foundation, were funding Antifa and their communist allies. Then, in December 2018, I started a 5-part series entitled Antifa Exposed, where I delved into how communists have infiltrated Silicon Valley, Antifa's tactics, how they plan riots, as well as Hillary Clinton and other prominent Democrats' involvement in the Antifa communist insurrection. And finally, I talked about how the reporting on Antifa and speaking the truth about their movement was causing them to lose support among the people. At that point, I thought Antifa's communist threat was over. I was wrong. I should have known better. You see, I've read the Communist Manifesto, Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, and understand that a communist revolution is not about creating a traditional civil war. It's about creating a long-term color revolution through a combination of major protests and propaganda campaigns as a cover for rioting, violence, and targeting of their enemies. While researching Antifa, one thing I quickly learned is that during the day, their members are teachers, college professors, members of the media, elected officials, unelected government employees and leaders, as well as big tech employees and leaders. This is the reason they wear masks, because if the truth were known about who they are is exposed, their careers would be over and they'd be arrested and sent to prison, for a very long time. With this in mind, when I talk of color revolution, most people give me blank stares. They just don't understand. So to allow everyone a better understanding, let's talk about the color revolution that occurred from November 2013 until March 2014 in Ukraine. While this is the subject for another video, on my BitChute account, I recently published a video appendix of the Ukrainian color revolution, and into the description of that video, there's a link to the study that appendix is attached to. Which brings me to the subject of this video, the American color revolution of 2020. So I found this quote online via Twitter. It says, "Remember in the RoboCop movies when corporate America aids criminals and helps incite riots so they can lower property values and buy up the city while privatizing that city's police force? Ha ha ha, science fiction is crazy." All right, so even though I don't believe that's the case here, I just thought that was a very interesting observation. But with that in mind, let's go ahead and go to this particular video. This is from they call it CHOP now, but it used to be called CHAZ, or the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in Seattle, Washington, in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. Go ahead and check it out. I just want you to listen to this because I think it's important.
It is not CHAZ, it is CHOP. CHOP. Has anybody here ever heard of the French Revolution before? That is another revolution because people started putting property over lives. They started putting money over people. Does anybody here know what happened to the people who did not get on board with the French Revolution? Say it louder. Say it louder.
All right, so what he's saying is that anybody who didn't get on board with the color revolution that occurred during the French Revolution, or I should say as the French Revolution, gotta love the one-take video. Anyway, anybody who didn't get on board with that was killed. Okay, they got chopped. They got their heads cut off. The guillotine was very prominent back then. I think that's something that's extremely important to really think about, because these people are saying that if you join the revolution and you oppose it, or you oppose it, just say from the get-go, that it's okay to kill you. I mean, it almost sounds like the idea of the infidel from some religion that we won't currently name right now. But that said, I don't really want to focus on this particular aspect of it. I just want to give you kind of an idea of how serious these people are. And this is important because there's people like Tim Pool who don't understand how serious this is. And they're like, oh, nobody's going to go shooting. I think that was something that he said. And again, I'm not trying to bust on Tim Pool. He does a lot of fantastic reporting, and he's very accurate in his reporting when it comes to the facts. But I think sometimes he doesn't quite get it. And there's a lot of people out there who have the exact same view. They don't quite get what's going on. And what I mean by that is you see this in the mainstream media. Tucker Carlson gets it, but he can't really say what he believes online or on his show. But there are a lot of people out there that kind of circle the airport a little bit. They go, well, it's not protests, it's riots. Well, okay, riot is a stronger term, and it's a more accurate definition of what's going on if you're going to look at it from a case-by-case basis, and you're going to look at it from a real close-up perspective. But the problem here is that this is a scenario where people cannot see the forest through the trees because they're stressed out. And if you've ever been in a physical confrontation before, if you've ever had to physically protect yourself, what happens is that your peripheral vision dies and you become myopic in your focus. And I think a lot of people are stressed out right now, and they're scared, rightfully so. And I think what's happening here is they are not seeing the forest through the trees. They cannot see the big picture because they don't have that experience in dealing with conflict. Now, with that in mind, let's go to the next slide. This is extremely important as well. This is a photo from the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ, or they call it CHOP now, the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest. Whatever they want to call it, I don't really care. It says, let 1,000 autonomous zones bloom. Now, this is important because according to the American news, Antifa is planning to take over more Seattle neighborhoods. Now, this is important because it's not just Antifa. It's Black Lives Matter. It's Act Blue. It's a lot of these other organizations. And just so we're clear, when I talk about Act Blue, what I'm actually discussing is the fact that when you donate to Black Lives Matter, those donations are actually going to Act Blue. To my knowledge, Black Lives Matter, and maybe I'm incorrect here, and you can correct me in the comments, Black Lives Matter is not a 501c3. They're not a charity. But Act Blue is a charity. They are a 501c3. Who knows where this money is going to? I know that a lot of conservative media personalities are looking into this, but I haven't seen any answers yet. So it'll be interesting to see how the truth plays out. You know, they always say that a lie travels halfway around the world before the truth gets its first airing. And with that in mind, the reason I'm bringing this up about the Antifa, Black Lives Matter, communist insurrection expansion is because this was on their Reddit. It says, and this is from CHAZ Radio, is the subject matter from Mandela Nuke, so whoever that is. It says, the global network of autonomous zones are establishing a grassroots radio station for local news, announcements, and broadcasts of street event coverage. I'm looking for boots on the ground who will provide that local correspondence. As of this post, our broadcasting content is purely automation, and our goal is to facilitate interviews and live streaming coverage of street events facilitated via the Discord app. If you can provide coverage of your autonomous zone or know someone who can, please get in touch. Now, this is important. Okay, right here, the global network of autonomous zones. Do you really think this is a protest anymore? Okay, they have a network, right? They've been organizing for years. I talked about this 2 years ago. And yeah, it was kind of fun when we laughed about Antifa in 2017 and how retarded they were. But they've been training for years. They've got their own gun clubs. They've got their own self-defense gyms. They've got their own workout groups. These people are serious. They are revolutionaries. They believe they're revolutionaries. Now, do I think that they're retarded? Abso-fucking-lutely. Do I think that they are way in over their head? Abso-fucking-lutely. Do I think that they want to take the free country of the United States and turn it into fucking Somalia? Absolutely. Okay. Now, I called it Chazistan. Everybody else is calling it Antifistan. I don't care. Chopistan, whatever the fuck you want to call it. It is an insurrection regardless. Now, with that in mind, they've already tried to expand. They expanded to Portland. Now, Portland abandoned its autonomous zone, and this was June 11th, and this was reported by the Washington Examiner. I'm not going to really dig into these articles. You can find them. You can read them. Very common sense. You can do an internet search on something other than Google. You can find all these things. But my point is that they tried to establish an autonomous zone in Portland. They've established one in Washington State, in Seattle. They are attempting to establish one. They tried to establish one here in Asheville, North Carolina, which, by the way, is a huge Antifa Black Lives Matter hub, okay, and has been. And I've talked about this a year and a half, 2 years ago. In addition to that, Capitol Hill in Nashville, Tennessee, according to they reported here. Let me see if it's the Tennessee State Capitol. They tried to establish another autonomous zone. They also established another autonomous zone at the University of Chicago. Let's go ahead and switch a little bit. And let's talk about the armament of Antifa and Black Lives Matter and this insurrection as opposed to the fact that they're expanding. I think the fact that they're expanding should be common sense at this point. But let's shift gears because there is an info war about this whole idea of Black Lives Matter being peaceful protests, okay? These are custom AR-15s, and if you look at the gentleman on the right with the bulletproof vest, you will see that he actually has a radio. Okay, so these people are organized, they have their own radio communications. This is a serious issue. In fact, it's so serious that Raz Simone, otherwise known as Antifa's President Camacho, has decided he's going to go ahead and start running guns from his Tesla. And by the way, if blacks were so discriminated against, and if they had a glass ceiling they couldn't get over, why does this guy own his own Tesla? Let's take a look right now. This is from YouTube.
More people know how to use firearms for training. Appreciate you.
He's walking up to his Tesla. Okay. He unlocks it.
We just
Watch.
got told there's another group they're meeting with there, and then they'll be moving in a few minutes, so be ready.
That guy's drinking Corona.
Somebody over there age 18 know how to use a gun?
Anybody here, 18, know how to use a gun? That's what he says.
Take the clip out and put it back in.
No one's gonna like fucking ask me walking in here with an after.
Nah, just come right back in.
All right, so let me explain something to you. There's a definition for that. This is called illegal gun trafficking. You shouldn't be giving guns to people randomly on the street, especially during an insurrection. This is a federal crime. Okay, the ATF the DEA, the FBI, any other alphabet agency, they need to take their dicks out of their purse, take their backbones off of layaway, and they need to go after these people and arrest them. They are trafficking guns in these autonomous zones. Now, the reason I bring that up is because of this right here. This is from BuzzFeed News, and this was from July 16th, 2019. Now, I'm not going to look at this article, but this basically was about the Antifa activist who was killed outside of ICE in the state of Washington over the summer of 2019. The reason it's important is because of this section right here. It says, "I am Antifa." And he talks about how he used a semi-automatic weapon in the attack, which was a cheap, home-built, unregistered ghost gun, an AR-15, and he had 6 magazines. Now, this is something that I've reported on my channel, where I've talked about how the Mexican drug cartels, the illegal aliens, are creating illegal ghost gun factories within the United States. And this is a perfect example of these types of ghost guns being used in an Antifa / Black Lives Matter / communist insurrection rebranded as a protest. It is a serious, serious problem. And it's one of those things that everybody's ignored. The mainstream media has ignored it. And it's a footnote even in this article. Anybody who talks about it, they kind of gloss over it and then they move on with their day. But let me tell you something. These people are armed. They're armed with ghost guns. They are acquiring these guns illegally, just like we saw right here with Raz Al Ghul or whatever the fuck we want to call him. But that said, here's another example of the protest where they say that they don't have guns. And this is, I think it's kind of important to listen to.
Anyway, we still got a pretty full crowd out here. I'd say there's a good 400 people or so. They have completely taken over this precinct. I want to give you guys a little perimeter view here.
Listen close.
So this is the East Precinct on 12th and Pine,
Hey,
Seattle.
folks.
It's Capitol Hill.
Okay, we have a message coming through from the John Brown Gun Club, who is helping us with security. There are some things they want you to know. The John Brown Gun Club is armed for your safety. They are on.
The John Brown Gun Club is armed for your safety. And I cut her off. Let's listen to what the rest of what she says.
On our side. They are on our side.
Yeah, they're on our side. Sorry, I had a little boomer moment. I had to go ahead and go back and clip that again. The joys of the one-take video. But that said, okay, so we've got these armed guards carrying assault weapons, which is fine. I mean, we have a Second Amendment right to carry weapons. That's fine. But what's happening right now is that the legacy media, the left-wing media, the propaganda engine of this organization who is fomenting insurrection within the United States is saying that these people are peaceful and that they are not armed. This picture debunks that. This video debunks that. This video debunks that. And the fact of the matter is that Antifa has a history of using ghost guns and illegal firearms in their protests. And anybody who ignores those irrefutable facts is not in touch with reality, or at worst, they are part of the problem. The reason why this is so important when it comes to the autonomous protests is because an interview was conducted with the police chief of Seattle. And this is extremely important because I'll tell you, the legacy media played this clip, but they deceptively edited it. And let me kind of explain it because I want to play the important part to you because this is extremely important.
Our 911 response times have tripled in the area. They've gone from just over 5 minutes to about 18 minutes. Rapes, robberies, and all sorts of violent acts that have been occurring in the area that we're not able to get to. So it is not a...
All right. So she's saying that there's rapes, robberies, and other acts of violence. They can't even get there. In fact, there was an issue where I believe a guy owned an auto parts store. He actually detained the person who was trying to go in, steal from him, and set his place on fire. The police never came, and eventually he ran out and started, hanging out with the chop people, and nobody would protect this store owner. Again, this is what's happening. If you want your city, if you want your state, if you want your country to turn into the Republic of Dogshitistan, this is how you do it. You expand these autonomous zones, you attack your law enforcement, and you overcome everybody. And by the way, this is not just a bunch of fucking people LARPing from their basement, okay? You have big tech CEOs that are lobbying Washington, D.C. You've got people who speak out against this who are being fired from their jobs. You've got law enforcement officers being targeted. By the way, there were cops who've been followed home and they've been assaulted, they've been threatened, they've been harassed, just like what happened in Ukraine. Okay, this is a full spectrum war that's happening right now. We are in a full color revolution. And anybody who is unwilling to see that, it's because you've been indoctrinated to just go along with it and just, ha, ha, ha. That's so edgy. Well, there comes a time where the edgy memes of the internet meet reality. And guess what? Anybody who doesn't think that this is a color revolution or who thinks that this is just some young kids LARPing, well, guess what, little Timmy? You're not on the internet anymore. And when it comes to Black Lives Matter, and when it comes to these issues that people are talking about and pushing for this, look, I'm an old school civil rights advocate, and I believe that a man should be judged by the content of his character, not by the color of his skin. And frankly, if Black Lives Matter was truly serious about saving Black lives, they would tell everybody to stop killing one another. 93% of all Black homicide, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, is committed by people within their own community. Period. It's not the cops. It's not the Latinos. It's not the rooftop Koreans. It's the people in their own community. And you don't even need to look at the Bureau of Justice Statistics to see this. You could look at the people who get arrested for the many murders that happen in Chicago and that happen in Baltimore and that happen in Detroit and every other dog shitistan where thug and thought culture are perpetuated. So, that I think is something extremely important to consider, because if we're going to talk about this subject, we need to actually talk about the uncomfortable truths as opposed to the many comfortable lies that are being perpetuated. And they're even being perpetuated by people on the right. This is not a protest. These are not riots. This is insurrection. Now, I know that many people will point to George Soros as being behind the current insurrection in the United States. But the reality is that while he might be partially responsible, the founders of big tech companies together have far more money and influence than him. In fact, many of them actually have more money than him individually. They currently command the largest lobbying groups in Washington, D.C., and they're the largest contributors to our elections. Further, by financing illegals, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and the censorship of Americans' free speech, they're waging an info war to indoctrinate Americans to hate America and the Constitution on which it stands. If the United States is to survive through this, it's my view that patriotic Americans of all demographics need to set aside their differences and stand together to oppose this communist color revolution immediately. And while I've said this many times before, it needs to be said at least one more time. President Trump needs to invoke the Insurrection Act today. Once invoked, he needs to use the military to target every un-American communist leader and prosecute them in a military tribunal for terrorism, inciting insurrection, and other crimes against the United States. He needs to go after these 501c3 charities, and he needs to seize their bank accounts, all their investment accounts, and everything else. And he needs to take that and use that money to prosecute them because they are aiding and abetting terrorism, which is a federal crime in the United States. Because if the federal government doesn't act soon, this communist insurrection will destroy the American way of life. I'm DDJ, and this is your dose of misandry today.